night I almost walked past my son's door changed everything I thought I knew about my own family. It was 12:47 in the morning. I know the exact time because I've been awake, the way I always am, when something unseen is pressing against my chest. 31 years as a federal judge teaches you to trust that feeling. It has never been wrong. My name is Richard Calloway. I'm 62 years old. I spent 3 decades on the federal bench in Chicago, presiding over cases that range from corporate fraud to organized crime. I've read 10,000 faces. I've listened to 10,000 lies. I've sat in quiet, absolute stillness while men who thought they were untouchable unraveled in front of me. One word at a time. Retirement doesn't change the wiring. It just gives it more time to notice things. My house is a 4-bedroom colonial in a quiet suburb outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. My wife, Eleanor, passed 4 years ago. Cancer. The kind that moves fast and gives you no time to negotiate. After that, I sold the Chicago property and moved here, closer to my son, Daniel. He was 34, recently engaged, and the one thing left in my life I would burn the world down to protect. Daniel had moved in with me 3 months prior. Temporary, he said. He and his fiancée, a woman named Cassandra, were saving to buy their own place. That's what he told me. I believed him. I had no reason not to. He was my son, my only child, a software engineer with a clean record, a steady income, and a laugh that still sounded exactly like his mother's. So when I heard his voice at 12:47 in the morning, hushed, almost breathless, I didn't storm in. I didn't call out. I did what 31 years of courtroom discipline had trained me to do. I stopped. I pressed myself against the wall of the hallway. I listened. The door was not fully shut. A thin blade of light cut across the hallway floor. I could see his shadow moving, pacing, the way he does when he's under pressure. His voice was low and controlled, but I've interrogated witnesses who spoke in exactly that register. It's not calm. It's practiced. He said, "She doesn't know. She's not going to find out." A pause, because I know how to handle it. Just give me 2 more weeks. Another pause. I told you, the account is ready. Stop calling this number. I stood there, motionless, for a full 40 seconds after he went silent. I heard the soft click of his phone being placed on the nightstand. I heard him exhale, long, shaky, the kind of breath a man releases when he's been holding it for days. I walked back to my bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark. I didn't turn on the light. I didn't write anything down. And then I heard it. He started again. A second call. Or maybe the same person calling back. This time his voice was different. Harder, colder, stripped of whatever patience he'd been performing before. And in that new voice, clipped and urgent, he said 3 words that made the hairs on my arms stand up straight. He said my name. Richard doesn't suspect. I sat very still. The room felt smaller than it had a moment ago. I placed my hands flat on my knees the way I used to do on the bench. When I needed to maintain composure during something that should have floored me, my son, my Daniel, was talking about me to someone I didn't know. In the middle of the night, assuring them that I had no idea. I didn't move for a long time, because here is what 31 years had taught me above all else. The worst thing you can do when you've just discovered something is act like you've discovered it. The moment the suspect knows you know, they adapt. They destroy evidence. They change stories. They run. So I didn't confront him. I didn't knock on his door. I didn't even let my breathing change. I lay down. I stared at the ceiling. And I began, very quietly, to think, because my son was hiding something large enough to require secrecy at midnight, a prepared account, a 2-week timeline, and the specific reassurance that his retired federal judge father had no idea what was happening under his own roof. He was right that I hadn't suspected. He was wrong that I wouldn't find out. The next morning, I made breakfast, eggs, toast, black coffee, the same as every Saturday. I set the plates on the table. Daniel came downstairs at 8:15, freshly showered, and sat across from me with the ease of a man who had slept soundly. I watched him, not the way a worried father watches, the way a judge watches, cataloging, filing, noting the micro details that most people miss because they're too busy reacting to look. His eyes were slightly swollen, the kind that comes not from sleep deprivation, but from the particular exhaustion of sustained anxiety. His jaw was tight when he chewed, even though he was smiling. He checked his phone twice in the first 4 minutes and placed it face down both times. When I asked how he'd slept, he said great, without a single beat of hesitation. Liars who are good at it never pause. They've already rehearsed. I said nothing about the night before. I asked him about Cassandra. He said she was coming over for dinner Sunday. I said that was nice. He relaxed slightly. I noted that, too, over the following 6 days. I watched with the patience of a man who has waited out far longer silences than this. I began to track the pattern, the way you track weather, not any single cloud, but the system forming behind it. He received calls every other day, always between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m., always taken in his room, always with the door nearly, but not fully, shut. Whether that was habit or subconscious invitation, I couldn't say. What I could say was that no man conducting ordinary business takes calls at midnight. With his door half open, he began withdrawing cash. Small amounts, 200 here, 300 there, from an ATM 6 miles from the house, rather than the one 2 blocks away. I didn't follow him. I didn't need to. I found the receipts in the pocket of a jacket he'd left on the coat rack. 2 of them folded together. Both time-stamped between 6 and 7 in the evening on days he'd told me he was working late. I said nothing. I kept the receipts. Cassandra arrived Sunday for dinner as planned. She was attractive, poised, and spoke with the deliberate warmth of someone who had practiced it. I'd met her 6 times over the past year and never once felt entirely at ease in her presence, though I chalked that up to the overprotective instincts of a widowed father. Now I watched her differently. She and Daniel exchanged the looks during dinner that didn't match the conversation. The first was when I mentioned I'd been organizing Eleanor's old papers. In the study, financial documents, property records from the Chicago years. Daniel's expression stayed neutral, but Cassandra's eyes moved to him for exactly 1 second. The second was when I said, offhandedly, that an old colleague of mine from the Federal Circuit had called about a fraud case. That bore some interesting patterns. Cassandra set down her fork. She picked it back up immediately, but she'd set it down. I stored that to Dot after dinner while Daniel was in the kitchen. She asked me, with a careful smile, how long I planned to keep the house, whether I'd thought about simplifying, maybe moving somewhere smaller, somewhere with a community, other retirees. She framed it as concern. I received it as reconnaissance. The following Tuesday, I went to my study at 11 p.m. and left the door open. I sat in the dark, reading by a small lamp, positioned so I could see the reflection of the hallway in the glass of a framed photograph on the wall. At 11:48, Daniel passed in the hallway, stopped, and looked in. He saw the light. He stood there for full seconds. Then he went back to his room. At 12:30, I heard him on the phone again. This time, I moved closer. He's still up. I can't talk long. A pause. The accounts are in his name. That's the whole point. We need him to sign, or we need to not need him to sign, if you understand what I'm saying. I stepped back from the door. I walked to my study. I sat down in Eleanor's old reading chair, the green one by the window, and I held myself very still. Accounts in my name, something requiring my signature, or a way around it. Cassandra's questions about the house, the cash withdrawals, the midnight calls, the 2-week timeline. I was not a worried father anymore. I was a federal judge who had just identified the shape of a crime. I called Warren Briggs at 7 the next morning. Warren was 6 to 7, semi-retired, and had spent 22 years as a forensic fraud investigator with the Department of Justice. Before we'd both left the federal world within a year of each other, he was the kind of man who could find a financial fingerprint in a document stack that looked completely clean to everyone else. He picked up on the second ring. I told him I needed him. He didn't ask unnecessary questions. I gave him everything I had, the cash amounts, the dates, the timeline reference, the phrase about accounts in my name. I read the exact words to him, the ones I'd been replaying every waking hour since I'd heard them. We need him to sign, or we need to not need him to sign. Warren was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's elder financial fraud language, Richard, word for word." He explained what I already suspected. Someone, likely Cassandra, based on the pattern I described, was positioning me as the unwitting signatory in a financial scheme. Accounts opened in my name, either with my identity already compromised or with plans to obtain my signature, under false pretenses. Daniel was either a willing participant or, Warren's quieter hypothesis, a man being manipulated by someone considerably more skilled than he understood. I asked Warren to pull everything he could find on Cassandra Reyes. That was her last name. Cassandra Reyes, 31 years old, from Phoenix, Arizona, currently employed as a financial consultant for a mid-sized firm in Charlotte. She had a clean surface, but Warren didn't look at surfaces. Within 48 hours, he called me back. Her name wasn't Cassandra Reyes, not originally. She had legally changed it 7 years ago from Cassandra Varro under that name. Warren found the civil fraud complaints in Arizona. Both settled quietly and expunged from surface-level records. He found a prior engagement to a man in his late 50s, a widower with significant assets, that had ended abruptly when the man's adult daughter had intervened and involved an attorney. He found connections to a financial management company that had been flagged by the SEC 3 years ago for structuring fraudulent investment accounts using stolen identities. Mostly elderly, mostly men, mostly isolated. She had a pattern. I was the pattern, and Daniel, my Daniel, had brought her directly into my house. I sat with that for a long time. I had to separate what I felt from what I needed to do. I had spent my entire professional life doing exactly that. I did it again now, in the green chair by the window, with Eleanor's absence louder than it had ever been. The question was whether Daniel knew the full scope of what she was doing. The answer would determine everything, not just legally, but in terms of what remained of my family when this was over. I made a decision. I would not confront Daniel yet. I would run the trap myself. I called my personal attorney, a woman named Patricia Shores, who had 28 years in estate and financial law. I told her I wanted to create a visible, but procedurally inert document, something that looked like a signed authorization for an account consolidation transfer, something that would be irresistible bait to someone who had been positioning me for exactly this kind of signature. She drafted it within 2 days. It was technically meaningless, but it looked like exactly what Cassandra needed. I left it on my desk, visible, in the study I kept unlocked. I mentioned to Daniel, casually, over dinner, that Patricia had stopped by to help me organize some financial paperwork, that I'd sign off on some account consolidations, that I was thinking about simplifying things as Cassandra had suggested. I watched his face. He smiled, but his eyes did something else entirely, something small, almost imperceptible. Relief mixed with something that wasn't quite pride and wasn't quite shame. 3 days later, I installed a small, motion-activated camera in the study, an old habit from a case involving a corrupt clerk who'd been photographed removing documents from chambers. The camera was no larger than a smoke alarm. It pointed at the desk. I went to a hotel for one night. I told Daniel I had an old colleague in town and we were having dinner and it would run late. I was back by 3 in the morning. I sat in my car in the driveway and reviewed the footage on my phone. At 11:41 p.m. The study door opened. Cassandra walked in alone. She went directly to the desk. She photographed the document with her phone. She opened the top drawer, my personal drawer, and spent 90 seconds reviewing its contents. Before she left, she took a business card from the corner of the desk. Patricia Shore's card. The attorney's name, number, and office address. She didn't know she was being watched. She never knew. I chose Sunday dinner again. The same table. The same for chairs. The same light over the kitchen that Eleanor had picked out 17 years ago from a catalog. She kept on her nightstand. I cooked. Daniel set the table. Cassandra arrived at 6 with a bottle of wine, and that practice warmth she wore like a second skin. As she kissed my cheek and called me Richard the way she always did, familiar, proprietary, already behaving like someone who lived here. I said very little during dinner. I let them talk. I watched. I waited. After the plates were cleared and Daniel stood to pour more wine, I placed a folder on the table. Clean, white, unmarked. Cassandra glanced at it, just for a second, but I saw the recognition move through her before she neutralized it. I thought we'd talk, I said. Daniel sat back down slowly. He looked at the folder. He looked at me. I opened it. Inside were Warren's findings, the name change, the prior fraud complaints, the SEC flagged entity, the prior engagement. Beside that, a still image from the camera footage. Cassandra, at my desk, at 11:41 p.m., 3 days ago. The table went very quiet. Cassandra didn't collapse. I hadn't expected her to. People like her don't collapse. They calculate. She looked at the photograph for a long moment, and then she looked at me with an expression that almost passed for composure. That's not what it looks like, she said. I know, I said. It's exactly what it looks like. I've heard that sentence spoken in my courtroom more times than I can count. It never once changed what the evidence said. She reached for Daniel's arm. He didn't move toward her. He was staring at the photograph with an expression I hadn't seen on his face since he was 9 years old, and I'd found something broken in the garage that he hadn't told me about. Not guilt exactly, devastation. Daniel, I said quietly, did you know? He looked at me. His eyes were full. Not all of it, he said. His voice broke at the edges. She told me it was just account reorganization, that it was legal, that you'd benefit. He stopped. I knew something was wrong. I didn't let myself see it. Cassandra stood up. She said something about this being a misunderstanding, and that she would have her attorney contact mine. The tone was crisp, performative, a woman retreating into procedure because she'd run out of options. Patricia Shores already has everything, I said, as does the Charlotte field office of the FBI. That call was made 2 days ago. She stopped at the edge of the kitchen. The document on the desk, I said, was a controlled decoy, drafted specifically to be worthless but irresistible. The camera footage of you photographing it, entering my private drawer, and removing a business card. That footage is already in the hands of a federal investigator, together with Warren Briggs' report on your prior activity under your previous name. That constitutes the foundation of a federal wire and identity fraud case. For the first time, the warmth left her face entirely. What replaced it was neither anger nor fear. It was something older and colder, the expression of a person who has run the same scheme enough times to know exactly when it's finished. She left without another word. I sat at the table with Daniel for a long time after. He didn't speak for several minutes. Neither did I. The wine sat untouched. The overhead light hummed faintly the way it always had in the house his mother had loved. Eventually he said, "How long have you known?" "2 weeks," I said. He nodded slowly. He put his face in his hands and sat there, and I let him sit there. Because a man deserves a moment to grieve the version of someone he loved that turned out not to exist. Cassandra Reyes, or Cassandra Varro, as the federal filing named her, was arrested 6 days later. The investigation ultimately identified for other victims across 3 states. All of them men between the ages of 58 and 71, all widowers, all targeted through deliberate proximity to a younger woman with extraordinary patience and a rehearsed personality. The total scheme exceeded $400,000. Daniel cooperated fully. He was never charged. He still lives with me. He doesn't talk about her. Some mornings I find him in the kitchen before I'm even awake, making coffee. Quiet and still the way I've been for most of his life. We don't speak much those mornings. We don't need to. What I think about, what I keep returning to, is not the scheme, not the fraud, not the rest, not even the nights I spent sitting in the dark with the weight of it pressing down on me. I think about the fact that she came into my home and looked at a retired man in a quiet house and saw a target. She looked at what grief had made of me and calculated vulnerability. She was wrong about what grief had made of me. It had made me patient. It had made me still. It had made me the kind of man who stands in a dark hallway at 12:47 in the morning and hears his name spoken in the dark by someone he loves and does not flinch, does not react, just listens and waits. Because the most dangerous thing in the room is never the person making noise. It is always the one who already knows.